Swarthmore College religion professor insists that Jesus was a non-binary, gender-fluid postmodern icon. Ignore all that son of God business, boys and girls. The creator and savior of the world was incapable of identifying his own gender. I'm Dr. Duke, he's Alex, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, chicas. Everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and the misery of college campuses around the world. Katie is off this week, so our good friend Alex Newman is in town to fill in. Today we start in Pennsylvania, where a professor at Swarthmore College is offering a class that asserts that Jesus Christ is non-binary. No, he's actually trinary, isn't he?
Or quadrinary?
No, he's trinary, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Oh, clever.
I mean, so if that's what the point is, right, that he's non-binary, he's part of a trinity, we could go with that, right?
I don't think that's what they meant.
That's not what our professor at Swarthmore's up to. So here's what we got. We got a Swarthmore College professor who teaches a class based on his book, which asserts that Jesus was non-binary. Mark Wallace, a religious studies professor at Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, was interviewed there. And by the way, does he not look like the next host of Jeopardy? Does he look like a college professor?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, he looks like
Hollywood weirdo.
He looks like David Hasselhoff without the bikini. Nevertheless, he said, he was interviewed for an article in October about his new class called Radical Jesus. And look at the title of this book because it tells you a lot. When God Was a Bird, Christianity, Animism, and the Reenchantment of the World. I can tell you what that book's about. It's about how Christianity messed up the beauty of paganism when even the early church saw the Holy Spirit as an animated dove, like the Greeks and Romans animated animals and the Egyptians in their religion. How much better was the world before monotheistic Christianity peed all over the beautiful traditions of animism and paganism? And what this guy's going to do, Mark Wallace, he's going to bring paganism back to Christianity, right? Fair enough? According to Swarthmore, Wallace's courses include sessions on Jesus as an animist, alongside examinations of Jesus as a political revolutionary and a non-binary in a gender sense. Wallace wrote in the book that he believes, quote, and this is for you, Alex, all of creation and its many inhabitants are God. All of creation and its many inhabitants are God.
Yep.
In a variety of different forms.
And I could not help but think of Romans 1, which I encourage everybody to go read Romans 1, because if there was ever a perfect description of what we're seeing happen to our society right now, it's that. And I want to read verse 24 and 25. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Here we are exactly doing what God described in Romans 1. And the cause of all this, he actually says earlier, is people suppressing the truth in their own unrighteousness. God says he made his attributes plain for everybody to see. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to know them.
Well, he also said man was made in his image, right?
God was made,
God made man in his image.
Absolutely.
Not the image of a
bird.
Of a bird, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just crazy. It is absolute evidence that the Bible is true. And also, I know this college is one of many private colleges that gets huge tax subsidies on every front. And so if we're going to have a ban on tax subsidies for religion, which I think is fine, we ought to also have a ban on tax subsidies for paganism and for sacrilege and for blasphemy. It's ridiculous.
This guy is a religion course. This is a course on Jesus. And what is the premise of the course? Paganism. You know, the funny thing was, 1,700 years ago, Christianity finally conquered paganism, and they did it without firing a shot. The Christians who were persecuted in the wake of Christ's death by Nero, 300 years later, that Christian community became the church of the Roman Empire. And the Christians conquered without waging war against the Romans. They didn't go on witch hunts against pagans. They didn't burn pagans at the stake or feed them to the lions like the Romans did to them. Christianity won over paganism because it was a much greater, more sublime, more overtly true idea than the idea that God is part of everything, that every rock and stone and tree is simply God. There's a reason why paganism lapsed for 1,000 years, because it was never convincing to begin with. doesn't hold this scrutiny test. And so what is our professor doing? This is a point that I've made for a lot of years. The progressive left is not creating more atheists by destroying God. They are repaganizing the culture. They are not creating scientific rationalists who would equally see through paganism. They are creating blind, wild believers, the cult of Wicca, the cult of the body, the cult of sexuality. This guy is a hedonist. He's a pagan who is, under the guise of teaching Christian religion and Christian courses, is repaganizing in a very religious way the students at this lost little university.
Yeah. And I hope people understand the implications of this. And I've tried to get people to do this thought experiment. I ask them, which non-Christian, non-Judeo-Christian society, anytime in history, would you like to live in? Would you like to live in Hindu society? Would you like to live in Aztec society? Maybe Mayan society or Inca society would be nice. Maybe pick a pagan shamanist African tribe. Which one of those would you want to live in? And are you comfortable with the human sacrifice, slavery, and the total lack? A lot of these people don't recognize the implications of abandoning Christianity and Christian civilization and Christian morality. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. Right? What happens when you abandon these things is you end up like just about every non-Christian society in all of human history. And people really should think about the implications of that before we move much further down this road.
Well, you see how unctuously self-arrogant, self-congratulatory this guy is. The professor goes on to say, in this new world of animation, in this world, if we return to a pagan world where every sun is a god, every cloud is a nymph, every mountain hosts a god, if we return to that, he says, quote, you'll see a rich environmental ethic, and it's always tied to environmentalism. You'll see a rich environmental ethic, not a religion about a God who is distant and abstract and invisible. This guy, he doesn't even understand Christianity. If you think the God of the Christians is distant and opaque and ununderstandable, the God of the Christians became man. He breathed what we breathe. He didn't become an animal. He didn't become a dog or a cat or a swan. He became a man. Why? So that he could better speak to the pain and the suffering of men. Something you know nothing about, Professor. He didn't become a man. He didn't let himself become represented as an animal. He became man so that he, the God of the universe, felt what it was like to be us. So we could no longer say, but you don't understand. No one understands pain like the God who suffered human pain. Your understanding of Christianity is just as bad as the fake pagan garbage you're peddling for what, $3,000-$4,000 a course under the name of Christian studies. It's a joke. Our second story is also about something quite similar. It's Tufts University, and Tufts University seeks to root out white Christian racism. So notice how quickly and how, for a lot of months now, suddenly Christianity now is part of the list. If you're white, you're a racist. If you're cisgendered, you're racist. If you're heterosexual, you're racist. If you are Christian, they've thrown that in there. If you are Christian now, you are especially white privileged. If you're white atheist, you don't suffer from the disease as much as the white Christian. If you're white Jewish, you don't suffer from the disease as much as the white Christian. So Tufts University promoted an event intended to root out racism, specifically among, quote, white Christian folks, unquote. The event was marketed as a retreat about white supremacy. The event's host, Spiritual Grounding, a Christian organization, which does not appear to be directly affiliated with Tufts, insisted upon the necessity of the retreat as George Floyd's murder highlighted once again the need for white folk to do their homework. So George Floyd is killed. I'm not going to say murdered. When you die of an overdose of fentanyl, generally speaking, they don't classify that as a murder. Nevertheless, because a police officer may or may not have killed George Floyd, white Christian kids at Tufts, Christian kids, have to do work because of that? How do you make that equation? How do you link those two things? George Floyd was killed by a police officer, so young white Christian kids, and only Christian kids, have to work on their racial problems.
Yeah, I've said all along for years now that all of this race mongering was ultimately about an attack on Christianity and an attack on the truths that are revealed in the Bible. And I think this really confirms that more than ever. We've seen this narrative now coming out of the closet. They're pushing it in the fake media, the idea that Christianity is racist, Christianity is white supremacist. We saw this after these racial incidents last summer. They said, oh, you got to take down your white Jesus statue from your church, right? They're trying to define everything about Christian civilization, the rule of law, Christian morality, the nuclear family, all of it as white supremacy for the purpose of taking it down. And again, I say it again, what comes next? Which non-Christian society did you want to live in?
Well, and I want to rehash something you just kind of said in passing. I remember when Black Lives Matter activists were demanding, when they were smashing statues, and they were actually going into church and smashing statues, and a couple of the leadership came out and said, all white churches need to remove their white Jesus statues or we'll destroy them. Non-white Jesus statues will allow to stand. That was literally what Black Lives Matter said. Now, who was Jesus?
He was a Middle Eastern Jew.
He's Jewish.
Yeah, right.
Right. When you look at Israeli Jews and you look at American Jews and you look at Jews down through history, do you see white people?
Not really.
Well, certainly more white than black. I mean, when you look at Jewish people, right, do you see black Jesus in that? This idea that we're thinking about Palestinian Jesus, right? To Jews to this day are classified under what racial category?
I guess white, huh?
Caucasian, right? Yeah. Semitic people.
Yeah.
So the idea that we've been told that Jesus was black, on what is that predicated?
Yeah. Well, it's a fraud and it's a lie, but it's again, it's part of this agenda. They want to call everything white supremacy,
right,
ultimately for the purpose of attacking truth and reality. And that's really ironic because, again, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew. How can you say a religion from a Middle Eastern Jew, from a tribe of Middle Eastern peoples, is Eurocentric or white supremacy?
Right.
And I'll go even further. And I know the social justice mobs will hate me. The best thing that ever happened to any of the cultures and nations where Christianity arrived was the arrival of Christianity. And that's not to say that everybody who arrived was a good Christian. There was plenty of evil people who were not Christian. But the arrival of Christianity was the best thing that could have happened to all of the cultures all over the world. And that very much includes, by the way, the pagan European tribes that existed prior to the arrival of Christianity in Europe.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And look, I'm not saying that Jesus was Irish white or British white, but the idea that because he's from the Middle East, he must look like an Egyptian or something is bizarre. Again, there's a reason that Jews are classified as Semitic peoples, they're Caucasian peoples, right? They're not considered they're not considered to be what we would call African-based. So when this whole Black Athena movement from the 60s and 70s, or the Black Lives Matter movement now that says black Jesus is okay. And by the way, if you want your Jesus to be black, I don't care. I mean, Jesus represented humanity broadly. So if you want to go ahead and paint black pictures of black Jesus or have a black Jesus in your church, that's fine. But why would you go around destroying quote-unquote white Jesuses? There's something really insecure about these Black Lives Matter people.
Well, they're anti-Christian to the core. They're actual communists. They've admitted on television that they are trained Marxists. We've got Opal Tometi standing next to the mass murdering tyrant Nicolás Maduro. And, it's very plain. They hate everything about Christianity.
Yeah, this spiritual grounding group stated that the event prompts, quote, white people to search their souls, unquote, and to, quote, understand how Christianity has contributed to racial inequity, unquote. Can we have a question? When are we going to have the first organization going around campus to campus to suggest how Islamic belief has contributed to inequality?
Yeah, and really the primary slave traders for the last 1,000 years were Muslims. They were launching raids into Africa.
Hundreds of years before African slaves were taken by Christians, they were taken by Muslims.
And they were taking Europeans. They were going all
today,
over. Yep.
The slave trade, as it is in places like Somalia, is an Islamic slave trade.
Yeah.
So the question becomes this: why is spiritual grounding not cocky enough to do real work here and get Muslim kids in American universities to look at their terrible long history with slavery? Somehow, I wouldn't hold my breath for that. And our third and final story today, and I think now you can see what our theme is, how progressives and universities are undercutting Christianity, minimizing and demonizing it, and trying to replace it with paganism. This is from Georgetown, which at some point in its history was a Catholic school.
Yeah, I think it used to be.
Well, they started, I mean, at some point, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, they stopped being a Christian university, and now are quite happy to be an anti-Christian university. Georgetown students are unhappy at a Catholic school that pro-life speakers are allowed on campus.
They're probably getting that Soros money. Soros has actually been funding Catholics for Choice, which, of course, is an oxymoron, but it's very typical of the phony Catholics. So
yeah, you think about this. So it's a Catholic school. The Catholic Church's position is still firmly pro-life, not pro-choice. And this Catholic school brings, among all sorts of other speakers, many of whom are radically progressive, pro-life speakers. The students who are spending money to go to a Catholic school, by choice, choosing to go to Catholic schools, are upset, and they say they're afraid. They're cowardly and afraid that when there are pro-life speakers on campus, we're frightened for our safety.
We should probably get them some puppies and crayons.
Who needs to be really frightened are any babies, any unborn babies on campus, right?
That's exactly right.
Pro-abortion students at Georgetown demanded the Catholic school condemn pro-life speakers at the recent Cardinal O'Connor Conference on Life, an annual event organized by students at the nation's oldest Catholic school. Oh, God help us. The nation's oldest Catholic school. That's not a Catholic school anymore. The conference, which bills itself as the largest student-run pro-life conference in the nation, has been held at Georgetown for more than 2 decades.
And look at these extremists and white supremacists they're bringing in. Dr. Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Oh, my goodness. And a nun, right? Sister Deirdre Dee Byrne, a Catholic nun. Can you imagine the radical extremist people that they're bringing in here?
I'll bet that nun doesn't want to pay for the birth control of employees of church.
We should burn her at the stake.
I bet you that nun sides with the Little Sisters of the Poor about not having to provide abortion services. This is what really scares those kids on college campuses at Georgetown. And I've said this many times before. If this was the Middle East and you, as a Christian, somehow got into a Islamic university, do you really think you'd be able to have these kind of protests? Do you really think you would be able to challenge the Islamic university that you chose to go to if they'd take you for its stance on birth or life? Where in the world would you, outside of the West, where in the world outside of Christianity, could you do this kind of stuff and consider yourself the hero?
And the victim at the same time. Right. It's crazy. But what's with this group? I'm not even sure what's going on here.
Hoyas. Their mascot is the Hoyas.
Oh, so, I see. Hoyas for choice.
Hoyas for choice.
Why is the little star instead of the O?
This is obviously up to them, right? They've either got maybe they're trying to distinguish themselves from the racist Christians who use the word Hoya, and so they put the asterisk in the middle there.
I see.
Yes, in our copy, Hoyas is spelled H*YAS. So these Hoyas for Choice, an organization of Georgetown students that is not formally affiliated or supported by the university, submitted a petition to the school's administration with signatures from more than 600 members of the campus community. The petition calls out Dr. Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is scheduled to participate in the panel discussion. For her opposition to, and they call her out for her opposition to same-sex marriage, as well as her support for former President Donald Trump and her criticism of Black Lives Matter. But, you know, to be black, female, and the relative of Martin Luther King, that disqualifies her for having any racial bona fides because she doesn't support Black Lives Matter.
It reminds me of that little chart we had. That's probably just underneath the overt white supremacy. So
being pro-life now, this is how the left does it, is not just being anti-feminism. Now, if you're pro-life, you are, according to the editorial in the newspaper, you are also anti-LGBTQ.
Think about this idiocy, though. On the one hand, we want to be pro-feminism, and on the other hand, we want to be pro-transgender. But if we're transgender, we don't acknowledge that there is an actual such thing as an actual biological woman. You would think if we had some logic anywhere around, that would be a little bit of a pickle.
Time now for some real education, a break from all of this campus nonsense. Today, we are talking about a great architect of the Baroque period. His name is Borromini, is his nickname. Francesco Borromini. He was born in 1599, died in 1667. He was an Italian architect who was a leading figure in the emergence of Roman Baroque architecture. Borromini developed an inventive and distinctive architecture, employing manipulations of classical architectural forms, geometrical rationales in his plans, and symbolic meanings in his building. This is, when you think about the Baroque period in art, it changes everything. The word itself, Baroque, comes from the Portuguese word for a misshapen pearl. If a perfectly round pearl with no flaws represents Renaissance art and architecture, everything logistical and geometric and beautifully, perfectly sublime and balanced out and symmetrical, well, the Baroque is that misshapen pearl. It is things that are beautiful but don't necessarily conform to the standard laws of beauty and imitation. Take, for instance, the architectural work that you're looking at now. This is the San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane. This is the Church of St. Charles. And you can see right away that Borromini is doing really exciting things with the outside facade of the church. These columns, the 4 columns, are the pillars that hold everything up. But look at how wavy the architecture is. It's as if the building is undergoing one continuous earthquake tremor. The lines, look at the side of the left side of the building, which does not go straight back as we expect in typical buildings, but flares out. Look at the nature of that second story colonnade which winds and writhes around the building. Take a look at the inside of the space. This is what you see when you look up from the floor. It's a very narrow space that Borromini is working in. It's a tiny building, very cramped and jammed into the middle of the heart of Rome. But when you look up there, you see a beautiful oval with a beautiful window with the symbol of the Trinity on it in the center. But then you get a little bit lost there. You've got ovals and circles, and you've got a larger oval that circumscribes the whole thing. This is not your typical rounded dome. This is in a way, this is almost surreal. This is almost the kind of thing you would expect if Salvador Dali was to go ahead and design a building. And the question becomes, how do you build a building that is so twisty and turny, so shockingly unpredictable when it comes to where the corners and the lines are? It's gorgeous when you see it. To be able to stand in front of altars and chapels like this with the art, to look up and see that kind of a dome, to see the outside and the inside so artistically unique and cramped, something you would never expect to see in a Christian church. Some Muslim churches play with space and play with convention. Muslim mosques play with conventionality this way. But this is really the first time in Western culture that you have this kind of eclectic sort of architecture, very typical of the Renaissance, the Baroque period, and especially very typical of Borromini. All right, if you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support our Patriot Club, and we'll send you our signature tumbler. Visit patriotclub.us, that's patriotclub.us. And just a quick reminder to please download our brand new Freedom Project Media app. Simply search Freedom Project on your smart device and download the app for free. And if you allow notifications on the app, you'll get notified every time one of our new 17, soon to be 18 shows a week is coming to you. And that's going to do it for this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. He's Alex. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.